starts quietly, almost without notice. The world outside is still, the sun just beginning to warm the rooftops, and the streets are empty except for the occasional jogger or dog walker. There's a sense of calm, a hush that feels almost sacred. Inside the church, everything seems as it always has. Except one Sunday, a familiar face is missing from the third pew on the right. The spot where they always sat is empty, sunlight catching the dust motes in the air. Maybe they're sick, you think, or perhaps on vacation, taking a much-needed break from routine. You tell yourself they'll be back next week, that this is just a blip. But then another Sunday passes, and another. The absence lingers, and soon, it's not just one person missing, but two, then three. The congregation thins, almost imperceptibly at first, like sand slipping through fingers. Soon, you realize it wasn't a temporary absence, it was a departure. The empty seats become a silent testimony to a shift that's happening everywhere. This story is repeating itself in churches across the country. A slow, steady exodus of young people who once wore their faith like a favorite t-shirt, comfortable and familiar. Now they're quietly slipping away, their absence echoing in the halls. They're not just sleeping in, they're walking away, often for good, leaving behind a faith that no longer feels like home. For many, it's a bittersweet departure, filled with memories and questions. This isn't a story of rebellion, it's a quieter unraveling, a gentle letting go rather than a dramatic break. It's the sound of hearts searching for something more honest, more real. My friend Sarah led Bible studies in high school, her faith once the center of her world. She was the one everyone turned to for answers, the one who prayed with conviction. Later, she studied astrophysics in college, her curiosity expanding as fast as the universe she explored. The questions she encountered were bigger, more complex than anything she'd faced before. The easy answers from Sunday school couldn't withstand the vast universe she was discovering. The stars above seemed to ask questions her faith community never prepared her for. She didn't leave in anger, but with resignation, feeling forced to choose between her intellect and her God. It was a choice she never wanted to make, but one that felt inevitable. The empty pews are filled with the ghosts of questions that were never welcomed. Doubts whispered in the dark, never spoken aloud, now linger in the silence. This generation was told to have faith, but rarely given the tools to build a sturdy one. They were taught what to believe, but not always why, or how to wrestle with uncertainty. They were handed beliefs, pre-packaged, with the implicit instruction not to poke too many holes. Questions were often met with discomfort, or worse, silence. But Gen Z is a generation of questioners, raised with information at their fingertips and unafraid to use it. They grew up in a world where every answer is just a search away, and every claim can be challenged. They're asking hard, messy questions that don't have simple answers. They want to know how faith fits with science, with justice, with the world as it really is. Many aren't leaving because they hate God, but because they love truth and can't pretend the version of Christianity they were given holds all of it. They're searching for a faith that can withstand scrutiny, that welcomes doubt as part of belief. The silence in the pews isn't an ending, it's the sound of a new beginning. It's the quiet before something new emerges, a faith rebuilt, reimagined, or perhaps rediscovered on their own terms. For many, the first thread that unravels in their faith journey is an intellectual one. It's not always a dramatic event, but rather a quiet, persistent curiosity that begins to tug at the edges of what they've always been told. It often starts with the standoff between science and faith, evolution in biology class, the Big Bang in physics, and a literal genesis in church. These aren't just abstract debates. They're real questions that shape how young people see the world and their place in it. They're told to choose reason or God, as if the two are mutually exclusive, a dichotomy that feels dishonest and incomplete. The pressure to pick a side can be overwhelming, leaving many feeling isolated. The God of the cosmos, they reason, shouldn't fear a biology textbook or a telescope. If faith is true, shouldn't it welcome every honest question, no matter how challenging? The friction extends far beyond creationism. Why does a good God allow suffering, injustice, or tragedy? These are questions that don't have easy answers, and the old explanations often fall short. Platitudes ring hollow in the face of real pain. When someone is hurting, simple answers can feel dismissive, even hurtful. They want a faith willing to sit in the darkness, to acknowledge doubt and suffering, not rush to tidy conclusions or easy fixes. When they bring doubts, about the Bible's history, its violence, or its exclusivity, they're often met with defensiveness or outright dismissal. The message is clear. Some questions are off limits. This creates a culture of silence, where authentic wrestling is driven underground. People learn to hide their questions, afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But they're not abandoning God. Instead, they're searching for a faith big enough for their curiosity, their intellect, and their deepest doubts, a faith that can hold both wonder and uncertainty and still endure. Beyond intellectual hurdles, there's a deeper, more personal struggle, a moral and cultural dissonance with the church's public witness, which often feels disconnected from the values many young people hold dear. For a generation that places a high value on justice, equality, and inclusivity, the church's alignment with partisan politics and its tendency toward exclusion can feel not just outdated, but fundamentally alien. The conflict is sharpest and most painful around issues of sexuality and gender identity, where the gap between church doctrine and lived experience is most visible. Gen Z grew up with LGBTQ+ friends, classmates, and family members. For them, acceptance isn't just a value, it's a lived reality. When the church condemns those they love, it creates painful, often heartbreaking choices between faith and friendship, belonging and authenticity. The church's teachings can feel not just outdated, but unkind, a betrayal of the radical inclusivity and compassion found in the Gospels, and a distortion of the message of Jesus. Hypocrisy corrodes trust. Churches preach love, but practice exclusion, speak of humility, but often seem to chase influence and power. This disconnect is glaring, especially to a generation that values transparency and integrity above all. For young people attuned to authenticity, this lack of integrity is a deal-breaker, making it hard to stay connected to institutions that feel inauthentic. They're not rejecting Jesus himself, but rather a version of Christianity that seems to have forgotten his core message of love, acceptance, and radical welcome. The Christian t-shirt from youth group no longer fits. It's become tight, restrictive, and now represents a culture and set of values they no longer recognize as their own. Instead, they're searching for a faith defined by genuine compassion, real community, and a commitment to justice, not by culture wars or exclusion. For many, leaving Christianity isn't about rejecting God, but fleeing the institution that claims to represent him. Scandals and cover-ups have shattered trust, making the church feel less like a sanctuary and more like a flawed organization. Hypocrisy at the local level, gossip, judgment, power plays, deepens the disillusionment. Deconstruction follows, a painful process of dismantling inherited beliefs, asking, is this true? Is this good? It's a lonely journey, often misunderstood by friends and family. But for many, deconstruction is survival, a search for something more real and honest. It's the demolition of a faulty foundation, hoping to find a cornerstone worth building on. The process is not destruction for its own sake, but a desperate search for authenticity. The story doesn't end in the rubble. Many find their way back to faith, but to a version that looks different from the one they left. This return isn't nostalgia. It's driven by a hunger for meaning and transcendence that secular life can't always satisfy. They rediscover ancient traditions, the symbolism of Catholicism, the beauty of orthodoxy, the reverence of mainline Protestantism. Liturgy and ancient creeds offer rootedness and a vessel for both doubt and belief. They dive into deep theological waters, discovering Christianity's rich intellectual heritage. This allows them to bring their whole selves, mind and heart, back to faith. The journey back is quiet and personal, about living within the questions and finding God in the midst of doubt. They're drawn not to rules, but to the mysterious, loving figure of Jesus. One of the strongest forces drawing young adults back is the need for community. The modern world is lonely. Digital connection can't replace real belonging. They crave a spiritual family, where they're known, loved, and supported. The communities that attract them are smaller, informal, and prioritize authenticity over performance. These are places where questions and doubts are welcomed, and love is practiced daily. The Eucharist becomes central, a symbol of grace and inclusion, where all are equal. For those wounded by exclusivity, this radical welcome is healing. They're finding not just a place to believe, but a place to belong. Faith becomes a shared journey, not a solitary pursuit. Deconstruction doesn't have to end in rubble. For many, it's the ground clearing for a more resilient faith. Reconstruction is slow and creative, piecing together a faith authentic to experience and rooted in tradition. It centers on Jesus, his love, solidarity with the oppressed, and vision for the kingdom. Doctrines become secondary to the command to love God and neighbor. This faith is measured by its fruit: love, joy, peace, not by certainty. Reconstruction is personal. Each person sifts through tradition to find what's life-giving. The result is a faith owned, not inherited, and more likely to withstand life's storms. This journey mirrors the Paschal mystery: death, burial, and resurrection. It's not a loss of faith, but its transformation into something flexible, resilient, and alive. To understand Gen Z's spiritual landscape, we must hold both stories, the leaving and the returning, at once. Focusing only on the exodus leads to panic and defensiveness, pushing more away. Focusing only on returns ignores the wounds and unanswered questions of those who don't come back. The truth lies in the tension. The church is both failing and succeeding, dying and being reborn. Living in this tension requires empathy, nuance, and humility. We must grieve with those who've left and celebrate with those who've found a new home. The future of faith will be messy and complicated. Our role is not to predict the outcome, but to participate faithfully. This means creating spaces for honest conversation, where all stories are heard. In holding this creative tension, we find the path forward. What feels like a crisis for the church may be an opportunity for faith. The empty pews signal not apathy, but a deep spiritual hunger. Gen Z isn't godless. They're dissatisfied with easy, irrelevant answers. Their departure is a protest, forcing the church to ask hard questions about its mission and identity. The crisis is stripping away non-essentials, inviting a return to the life and teachings of Jesus. The future will be small, diverse communities, living faith out in daily life. It will be a faith comfortable with mystery, always reforming, and rooted in love. The invitation of Jesus to come and see remains as urgent as ever for a generation searching for home.